the very first time back in the meeting. Ready to go when you are.
So I guess we'll just go ahead and start then. All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. My name is Seth Billingsley. I'm the Conservation Associate for Environment Texas, a nonprofit advocate for clean air, clean water, parks and wildlife, and livable climate. Our nation's capital is, unfortunately, not always a place known for its ability to get things done. But after years of failed infrastructure weeks, both sides of the aisle are working together in Congress to deliver the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Beyond the halls of Congress, most folks don't spend too much time discussing infrastructure, but this tangible framework of our country, from sturdy roads and clean pipes, plays a critical role in maintaining public health and our environment. Most importantly, truly bipartisan legislation features a major transportation, clean water, and power infrastructure package that will have a big impact on our state. In addition, the White House is currently negotiating with congressional Democrats on the Build Back Better Act, which encompasses additional priorities needed to meet climate and other environmental goals, including clean energy tax incentives, the reinstatement of polluter pays Superfund tax, a fee on methane, as well as increased funding to tackle air and water pollution. These bills could dramatically improve public health and the environment in our state, Texas. We've got a great lineup of speakers here today to review some of the key provisions in the bills. First, Congressman Doggett will speak, and I understand he has particular interest in some of the electrical infrastructure provisions. And then hopefully he'll be able to talk a little bit about his leadership to create tax incentives for EV charging. Next, we have the former mayor of San Antonio, Phil Hardberger, here to speak about the Tobin Land Bridge, among some of the importance of collaboration to have green infrastructure here. And that will be followed by Dr. Sharon Wilcox of Defenders of Wildlife, and she can talk about how the bipartisan bill invests in wildlife corridors. And then John Beard of the Port Arthur Community Action Network can speak about the importance of restorative justice and infrastructure. And then finally, Bay Scoggin will close for us of the Texas Public Interest Research Group, and he will speak about the bill's historic investments in public transportation. So with that, thank you so much again, everyone, for being here. And I'd like to hand the proverbial mic over to Representative Doggett.
Well, Seth, thank you. And thank you for the leadership of Environment Texas. I do have some provisions that I've worked on in what's called the Green Act, which is the product from the Ways and Means Committee that is part of Build Back Better. I could say they are actually electrifying because they are electrifying provisions that include trying to ensure that when you travel across a state as big as Texas, you neither run out of gas nor with electric vehicles run out of battery charge. So getting these chargers out there. But and I'll be glad to respond on any of those things, but I'm really here to lend support to your effort concerning wildlife corridors and their inclusion in Build Back Better. And it's particularly special to me to be here with my longtime friend, Phil Hardberger, who I first met when I was a University of Texas student. You can tell that was a couple of years ago. In considering the many extraordinary contributions that Phil has made to San Antonio and really to all of Texas, I'm reminded of the insight from Robin Wall Kimmener's book called Braiding Sweetgrass. She wrote, "To love a place is not enough. We must find ways to heal it." The land bridge that is at Hardberger Park, connecting two sides of that park, bearing his name, is just one of many tangible examples of Phil's commitment to healing our environment. Like his work long ago as an attorney, protecting the Edwards Aquifer and the green space over it, Phil has made an invaluable contribution. The land bridge completed, which I'm sure he'll talk about more, in December of last year in the midst of the pandemic, is the largest wildlife crossing anywhere in America. And it's wide enough to let both pedestrians and wildlife get across there at the same time. From what I have heard lately about sightings of a gray fox and a bobcat, it seems to be working and more peaceful than Congress. In this Congress, we have had an historic opportunity with great new leadership from President Biden to build a greener, more equitable economy that provides for the health of both the people and our planet, which is in crisis. As you well know, we've got two pieces of legislation. One, an infrastructure bill with focus on kind of the hard infrastructure, and the other, which is the Build Back Better bill that deals with a wide range of softer but every bit as important infrastructure, from electric charging stations to childcare and the child tax credit. Both the Senate approved infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better proposal that the House has approved include meaningful investments in protecting, restoring, and connecting habitat and travel routes for wildlife. These efforts are even more important in the face of the growing climate crisis that we learn more about almost every day from different parts of the world, but which we can feel with a Texas that is accustomed to being in the summer months hot and hotter, but now is just hotter. The infrastructure bill included, that the House originally approved, included the I'll get it right in a minute, the Wildlife Corridors Conservation Act, which would have helped establish a national wildlife corridor system. Although the Senate bill does not include that, it does include $350 million in funding for the Wildlife Crossings pilot program. According to the Wildlife Management Institute, this is the first time that funding has been specifically allocated for the maintenance of wildlife movement corridors. If enacted, this is a program that has the potential to help stimulate local economies and support biodiversity, as well as to reduce highlight fatalities, as anyone who's had the misfortune of connecting with a deer across much of Texas happens almost every evening. The House version of the budget reconciliation bill includes $10 million in funding for wildlife corridors. More broadly, the proposal in the House Build Back Better Act includes a variety of measures about clean power, reducing reliance on fossil fuels, reducing air and water pollution, doing something about lead pipes, supporting communities in the front lines of climate change. And Phil, I think something that eventually could be very useful at Hardberger Park, the creation of a civilian climate corps. We already have a local one here in the city of Austin that's doing great things in our parks, built on the old CCC of the New Deal Roosevelt days. This is a modern one that focuses on things like planting trees and doing things to address the climate crisis. There are other provisions, as was mentioned, that I have concerning EV charge and a Green Transportation Act to reduce pollution by mandating the measurement of emissions from various local transportation plans. I think the big question, though, is how we pass any of this when my friend, and he has been a friend, Joe Manchin over in the Senate, comes from the state where coal is still king. And so some of the provisions that are the most important, like clean power plants and less reliance on fossil fuels, are clearly at risk in this. Negotiations are ongoing. We need continued attention on these issues. These are not just frills, they're at the center of how we deal with the climate crisis. I think the Biden administration being there presents us many opportunities to begin to heal the damage of the Trump administration, but there's so much more that needs to be done. The climate and the environmental proposals involve clearly some difficult trade-offs. There are not any cure-alls. And as they talk about bringing down the total cost of the bill, all of these various provisions, along with health and education and programs, other programs for children, get squeezed. And we just want to be sure that we keep in this bill the very important objective of a decarbonized planet and all the joy that is brought by places like Hardberger Park, where animals can move freely, and so can the many people who come out to see them and enjoy a wonderful, unique park. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate your words today. Thank you. And so with that, Mayor Hardberger, I'd like to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I do want to say that I really appreciate what Congressman Doggett said and his lifelong fight to make Texas a better place and the United States a better country. Very, very fortunate to have him in Texas to kind of counterbalance a lot of people that don't help much of anything. But as I'm here to talk about Hardberger Park and what we have our own private wildlife corridor there, And that was the idea from the very beginning. We had started a park that now is named after me, but about 10 years ago. But there was a perfect place. The trees had never been cut. One of the trees is 400 years old. Wonderful place to have a park. And the only problem was there was a freeway at that going through it. 6 lanes now, but TxDOT makes you have another lane on each side for expansion purposes. So it would be, we had to build a bridge that would go across 8 lanes of traffic, 6 of which are happening right now. And the cars go about, I think the speed limit's 60, but I think the actual speed is probably about 75 along there. And we had several animals that had been killed. I felt it was just a question of time. We'd had a few wrecks and no serious injuries to the human beings, death to the animals. But I was pretty sure that sooner or later there would be death to the drivers of those cars too. It's just a question of time. But in any case, we had always wanted a park that was as friendly to the people as to the animals, or vice versa. So the need fit in with our concept. Well, let's build a bridge across it. We'll call it a land bridge. There were about 6 of those in Europe, none in the United States at that time, that would handle both people as well as animals at the same time. So to do that, though, you have to have a wide bridge. In our case, it's about 3/4 the size of a football field wide, and also going the other way and lengthwise, also about 3/4 of a football field. So it's quite massive. And there are no fences between where the people walk and the animals walk. There is a berm, which you can see over, except for now the grasses, which, by the way, we planted from 1850 seeds, have now grown up and are very tall. So it's difficult now for animals to even see people, and vice versa, which is what we wanted. We wanted it to be blind so that while there was no hard barrier between the people and the animals, they wouldn't see each other. They would not interfere with each other, even during the daytime when the park is open. It's closed at night. So even more so there, because there you don't have the people, but you do have the animals. And we've gotten a lot of photographic proof of that with our nighttime cameras. In addition to those that Congressman Doggett talked about, we have coyotes that go across there, lots of smaller animals, armadillos and other Texas animals. By the way, when we were building this, because it was a pretty massive undertaking, so it was not cheap. The whole cost of that from start to finish was $23 million. As you might expect on any big civic project, there were cries that it was a waste of money and fix the holes in our streets. But I will, and so one of the derogatory terms was, we're spending all that money on a critters bridge. Well, it wasn't just for critters, although I'm happy to be on the side of God's little animals. You can call them critters if you want. But I think I've got the best end of the argument. But in addition to that, we have over 1,000 human critters that cross that bridge every day. So it has really worked out beautifully. It stopped all of the deaths of the animals on our freeways. And it allowed free passage for animals that were on one side of the park to the other side of the park. Very important, because on one side of the park, it's much greener. That's the Blanco side. There's a lot more water over there, and there's perched leaky aquifers that are always leaking water over there. That the north side, which is more traditional hard scrabble South Texas, they didn't have that much water. So now they can get to their water, they can get to each other so they can mate. And it's a pretty happy situation out there right now. So it's been fun doing it, and very much so fits in with your concept and the legislator's concept of a wildlife corridor. We have it every day. It works absolutely perfectly as far as I know. And certainly it's just a massacre on Texas highways every day. Every day it's a massacre. If you don't believe it, just drive on any highway practically. And you see all the carcasses on the road and so forth. You know, when we run out of wildlife, we're probably about going to run out of people pretty shortly thereafter too, is my feeling. So we need to protect what God's given us. And that's what the wildlife corridors do. And that's in specific what the land bridge does in Hardberger Park.
Thank you, Mayor Hardberg. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us while you're on vacation as well. It's nice to have you here.
Well, as I told you, Seth, when we talked, any platform I can be on with Congressman Doggett, I'm going to be on there. I don't miss those opportunities.
Well, thank you. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to John Beard. Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Steph. And good afternoon to all of you. Good afternoon, Congressman Doggett. Hope you're feeling and doing well today. And thank you for this opportunity. Thank you also for comments you gave earlier with regard to the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better Act. As you said, I'm John Beard from Port Arthur, Texas. And I like to say that Port Arthur is at the nexus of climate change. You've heard of all of the disastrous storms we've had on the Gulf. Well, in the last 15 years, Port Arthur's been hit by 5 of them. But we're also part of the chemical build-out, petrochemical build-out. And that petrochemical build-out has seen us have the largest refinery in the United States, Motiva, 2 LNGs, and possibly a 3rd looking at coming into this region. A lot of construction, a lot of traffic, and a lot of work in a very small, limited area. And Port Arthur has suffered from a lot of the environmental degradation and those problems brought on by fossil fuels. However, I believe that the infrastructure bill is going to help that, as well as the Build Back Better Act with the provisions you've discussed. And one of those that really caught my attention was the support necessary for frontline communities. My particular part of the community where I live in Port Arthur, the west side, is bounded by Motiva on the north, Valero on the west, the port on the south, and numerous other smaller refineries, not least of which to mention Total Refinery to the east. So we're virtually surrounded by these refineries. And when you spoke to the fact of them monitoring emissions and pollutions and trying to clear that up and clean that up, we need that. We need clean air, clean water, because having lived around this for all of these years, a lot of people are being affected in terms of their health. So by building back better and building back cleaner and greener, that's going to help the health and the lifespan of people in this community. So that's very important to me. Also, the Climate Corps you spoke of, similar to what has happened in the past with the Peace Corps and other action corps, that would be a great thing here, because despite all of the advancement and development by the petrochemical industry, we still have some of the highest unemployment in the state. There's a reason for that, but we need to do more to create jobs and opportunities in this new clean green economy that the president speaks of, that is going to help us and help change or restore this community and restore the health and welfare of people on the Gulf Coast. Also, the clean energy tax credits. We have a high number of senior citizens. There are elderly people here. We have people also who are economically disadvantaged, sizable portion of which is in the city. 2/3 of the city are people who will be considered at risk economically speaking. So by having these tax credits and helping rebuild infrastructure, that's going to help us directly. It's going to help also people in their homes reduce their home costs and the heating costs, especially in the winter, and the cooling costs in the summer, just as you said, because it does get hot here. So this bill has a lot in it that we believe is going to be very helpful and beneficial. And I understand the issues that you all have with Joe Manchin. I do hope you all are able to persuade him and get him to understand that what's going to be good for Port Arthur is also going to be good for him. It's going to make a difference for him. We know we have to have an energy transition, but we have to have one that does not leave anybody behind. And that's not the object of what this is all about. It's to help him as well as help the whole country. So I applaud you. I applaud the work of you and the other congressmen and senators there. And please get this bill passed as soon as possible because our communities can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your insight, and thank you again for joining us here today. And so now we'll have the chance to hear from Dr. Wilcox of Defenders of Wildlife.
Hello. I also would like to start by thanking Representative Doggett, Mayor Hartberger, and Councilman Beard for your comments. I hope to shine a little more light into one aspect of this transportation bill. So the bill contains a meaningful $350 million allocation for a wildlife crossings pilot program. And Defenders of Wildlife and many other coalition members worked hard to get this included in this bill. And we want to thank both the representatives and staff on the House Transportation and Infrastructure, as well as Natural Resources Committees, and the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works for hearing this message and understanding how important wildlife crossings are as a key element of green infrastructure. So I'd like to highlight briefly what wildlife corridors are and how crossings play into this. So development, habitat fragmentation, and wildlife vehicular collisions have severe impacts on populations of wildlife, including iconic species like white-tailed deer, monarch butterflies, and ocelots. Wildlife corridors and road crossings improve connectivity of habitat for a wide range of species that share our Texas landscapes. Connectivity improves access to prey and water, as we heard about in San Antonio, and it increases species movement and safe passage. It allows for better genetic health in wildlife populations, boosts these populations, and makes vulnerable wildlife populations stronger and more resilient. Corridor design also allows us to better direct the movement of animals on the landscape, reducing or mitigating conflict, including vehicular collisions. Animal-related crashes cost motorists over $1.3 billion a year in Texas. Texas ranks 5th in the nation in deer collisions, with nearly 61,000 occurring in 2018 alone. And the swath of hill country between Austin and San Antonio has one of the highest deer densities in the state, and also one of the highest reported number of wildlife collisions. Mitigation measures like this amazing wildlife bridge we now have in San Antonio reduce wildlife vehicular crashes by 70 to 90%. Crossings and corridors help reduce accident rates and lighten the strain on local economies and individual taxpayers. Researchers have also repeatedly found that structural highway mitigation measures for wildlife create positive cost-benefit value. They create jobs and engage broader ranges of industries and workers in the design and construction of these highway crossings. They stimulate economies in rural areas, and they support wildlife-centered economic development. Wildlife-related tourism adds almost $9 billion a year to the Texas economy and supports more than 139,000 jobs. Briefly, I also want to mention a real success story here in South Texas, I should say in South Texas, that I think pairs very nicely with this wonderful story in San Antonio of the highway bridge. So our story in South Texas takes us under different highways. I'm talking here about the ocelot, which is a very rare wild cat that resides in Texas. We have 60 to 80 cats remaining in the state, and they reside on both public and private lands in the lower Rio Grande Valley. So the leading cause of death for ocelots in the state of Texas was vehicular mortality or vehicular crashes. And in 2016, we had a terrible year where 7 ocelots were found dead on the side of highways, representing possibly 10% of the Texas population. However, TxDOT and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service partnered to install 12 underpasses that offered these cats safe passage under some of the busiest high roads in South Texas. At a cost of $8 million, these 12 underpasses have brought us from 7 deaths a year to nearly no deaths. We've had, I think, one death on public roads in the past 5 or 6 years. This is a huge victory for ocelots and ocelot conservation. With that, I will turn it back over to Seth.
Thank you, Dr. Wilcox. I really appreciate that. And that's crazy. I had no idea that we lost, essentially 10% of our ocelot population. That's just devastating. But I'm really glad to hear that those underpasses are working. So thank you for sharing that. And so finally, I'd like to turn it over to Bay. Bay, thank you for your time here today.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for being here. Another little known fact about the ocelot is that they are definitively the cutest cat, and I know that because they get Oz a lot. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, animal puns are check plus off this webinar. We can hit that on your webinar bingo if you had it. But as Seth said, my name's Bay, and I'm the director of the Texas Public Interest Research Group, or TexPIRG for short. And I want to talk really briefly, because I know we're already at the 30-minute mark, and I'm sure everyone has schedules, about one of the biggest pieces of this infrastructure package, which is the transportation-related spending. Most importantly, we have a little over $100 billion in new spending for non-highways and bridges transportation. So that means more safe sidewalks. That means more electrification of our buses and school buses. It means more new investments like Project Connect, where we're giving people new options to get around our town. It means repairs and remodels for many of the bridges and the fleets and infrastructure for transit agencies. And so there's a lot of good here to be seen in detail. And I think the key thing is to remember that transportation is really the infrastructure that touches our lives, perhaps in more ways than anything else behind the scenes. In Texas, commute times continue to increase, especially in the urban and suburban environments. And that's largely due to the state's choice to continue to emphasize large highway projects, which induce demand for driving, increase congestion, and increase climate-related impacts of transportation-related greenhouse gases. Interestingly, they also affect our public health. The air along major highway corridors is significantly impacted with particulate matter from those mobile source emissions. And people who spend more time in their car are more stressed, which leads to worse cardiovascular and neuro health. And they tend to eat worse too, because if you spend an hour each day in your car, you're much less likely to make a home cooked meal at the end of the day, and much more likely to get something quick and easy and cheap and unhealthy. So climate, health, mental health, and congestion, massive ways that this spending would help improve our lives. I think for Texas specifically, we know by formula alone, that means before we start talking about any of the grant programs for which local agencies and state transportation departments can apply, we are expecting $3.3 billion in transit-related funding. And so that is a significant boon for transit agencies to get the green light to go ahead and start planning out new investments and give people more service, better service, and more options to get around that doesn't have such significant impacts on our overall well-being and whole. So I think I want to stop there because I know we're probably a little past, but happy to answer any questions about transportation as well.
Thanks, Bay. Appreciate that. And I would like to open up to Q&A to our attendees. You'll see that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to post any questions there. To our panelists, you all should be able to access the questions from your end as well, but there's already two here, so and both of them are directed to Representative Doggett, so I can just briefly read those. So the first question comes from Bob Austin, and he says, I've read that Manchin killed the clean electricity purchase plan. I've also read that the Finance Committee will try to replace it with an equally strong provision, a fee on carbon pollution with a carbon dividend for low to mid-income families. Do you think that this could get by Manchin and be supported by enough Democrats in the House, Representative Doggett?
I know that Senator Manchin has been critical of the plan, and with our needing every single Democratic vote, it may be challenging to get it approved by him. I've not talked recently to Chairman Ron Wyden of the Finance Committee, but I know that they have expressed interest in some kind of carbon tax. The carbon tax and dividend program is one that I'm a co-sponsor of in the House. It is likely to be a hard sell because it is a tax. It is a tax where all the benefits go back to those who pay it, and an incentive for energy efficiency, but a tax nevertheless. I think we will, not get any Republican votes for it, as is true of this entire matter. And it may be difficult to get 100% of the Democrats for it. So it is worth advancing. It could be an alternative. One of the people who has been right along with Joe Manchin in raising objections to some parts of the Build Back Better plan, Kirsten Sinema, seems to have endorsed this kind of approach. Well worth looking at, but hard to say whether we can move it.
Perfect. Thank you for your response. I appreciate it. The second question is somewhat similar. You might have already touched on this a little bit, but do you think that there are any potential provisions that might entice Senator Manchin to support it, potentially federal investment directly into West Virginia or Green Jobs program? I know you touched on the Green Jobs potential earlier.
I'm not sure what they are, but I've long advocated an LBJ moment. I just have to feel like if our president were Lyndon Johnson, Joe Manchin would be over there at the White House hearing about what could be done for West Virginia and what might be not done to it were he in charge. And on voting rights, which is so critical to our future, I'm sure that there's some discussion going on. I'm not a part of it. I don't know what it will take to bring Joe across the line, but whatever it is, we need to get it done and get this bill passed this month.
Excellent. Thank you for that response. There is a third question. What is the best way for us to advocate for infrastructure funds coming into our local communities, presumably from the federal government, for specific projects? And how will these funds be allocated and by whom?
Well, it all depends on the form the final bill takes, but a substantial amount of money will go to TxDOT, a very substantial amount of money. And I really wish that there were a few more limits on their discretion in how they expend it and where they expend it. I had an amendment that was accepted in the original House Transportation Bill that Representative DeFazio passed that did change some of the provisions concerning the metropolitan planning organizations, seeking to make them more representative and give them a bigger role. That is not part of the Senate infrastructure bill referred to as the bipartisan bill, and it should be. I think we'll be in pretty much the same situation we have been in the past, and that is trying to get TxDOT's attention, get resources for them where in the past they seem to be focused more on toll roads than meeting secondary road needs in many of our communities. Including, ironically, many of the roads that have been the most impacted by the expansion of oil and gas in South Texas with fracking and other ways to expand the use of fossil fuels. So I think certainly I'm pleased that we have a Secretary of Transportation who comes as a former mayor from understanding the needs of these urban areas, and there's some money he has discretion over. I expect every community like those that I represent, San Antonio to Austin, will be making application for some of these funds. If we can get this wildlife corridor provision included, I think it could be a source of funds for Hardberger Park and for other facilities that take the same approach. So it's a matter of both the application to the federal and the state level and urging local officials to come together and work together to prioritize the needs that each local community has.
And if I can just add to that, I don't
Sure.
know if people can see additional heads other than the one talking, but I was nodding vigorously through most of that. I think the very first answer is that we've got to get the bill passed first. That's still step one and is going to be step one to get the money flowing. But as the congressman said, I think it's absolutely correct that we had hoped that there would be some guardrails, if you'll forgive the pun, on state DOTs for what the roads and bridges funding can be spent on. That provision got removed in the final Senate approved version of the bill. And so we as state advocates have a lot of work to do working with TxDOT and for those folks outside of Texas, similarly in all states, red and blue, big and small, advocacy at the state Department of Transportation level is going to be crucial in making sure that these infrastructure projects are wins for Texas long term. And so that's work that still has to be done. That's step two. And then step three is also working with, like you mentioned, your local transportation departments. I guarantee you they are following this very, very closely and are aware of what pots of money are going to be made available to them. But as TexPIRG has done, as Environment Texas have done, and I'm sure many other groups have done, adding letters of support to their grant applications is a nice touch, and staying in touch with them and making sure that they have the resources that they need and they are going in the correct direction with their grant applications is a really good way for you to get involved as well.
Thank you, Bay. I might actually jump. One question will come back though while you're speaking about this already. Could you maybe talk about the impact of these bills regarding electric cars charging stations and how the bills may be able to help move cities towards infrastructure electrification?
Sure. As I mentioned, in a state as big as Texas, we need range for our vehicles. And while batteries are improving and the technology associated with the vehicles is improving to give more range, it is important that we have eventually charging stations as accessible as service stations are today. And so the Build Back Better Act that we've been considering in the House includes some direct appropriations, as does the Senate infrastructure bill. And the provision that I authored provides some tax incentives for private investment in this area, because it will need to be both private and public investment. Public along public thoroughfares, but already many grocery stores, office buildings are beginning to put in a few stations. It is not only important to have a charging station, but the faster charging stations where you don't have to leave your car parked in all afternoon is really important. And my goal in doing this has also been to try to assure that all of these are publicly accessible so that anyone can use a credit card or other device to get access to these charging stations. I think we will see the direct appropriations that are in the Senate bill approved, and I hope we'll get a substantial portion of what I've advocated as the tax credit to encourage more private investment.
Thank you. And then also another question. Will there be careful planning, I presume, when we're discussing the wildlife corridors, but potentially other provisions in the bill as well, to include only native plants and habitats, or is that something that's been discussed at all?
It ought to be in the rulemaking and guidelines, but Mayor Hardberger may have some thoughts about that too from what they've done in Hardberger Park on native plants.
Yes, we made it a point to try to eradicate any exotics or foreign plants in the park, which, by the way, got us a whole army of volunteers, retired people and so forth, but also some of the oil companies would send out these teams of people, New Star, and we would pull all of these invasive species out. So for the most part, there are no invasive species on Hardberger Park or in the whole park, not just on the bridge. The park's large. It's a half the size of the Central Park in New York City, by the way, just kind of concept. And what we did plant there that wasn't already there, we went and got basically Alamo era seeds and planted those all over the park. Texas historians often talk about people coming to San Antonio and further west that there was grass as high as an elephant's belly. Many books, you'll see that phrase. Well, I looked at my little puny grass in my front yard, and I couldn't imagine grass as high as the elephant's belly. However, when we planted these Texas seeds, the grass is as high as an elephant's belly. It was kind of like, well, I'll be darned. They weren't exaggerating. So what we've tried to do is to do everything we can to make the park look like it was in 1840, had you been riding into San Antonio. And one advantage of that is it takes care of itself. It's pretty hardy stuff. We have a lot of heat, not much rain. When we do, it floods. Sometimes we have real cold weather, so forth and so on. All of those plants, if properly grounded in their heritage, you don't have to do anything to them. They just grow. And so a lot can be done in that sense. I will say that I'm certainly glad that we're working though on electrical vehicles and so forth. Battery storage, of course, is a huge problem, but it is one I think that's not unconquerable. We've had bigger problems and can make it happen. And I just wanted to also throw in that since Hardberger Park was open, several other parks across the United States for animals and animal corridors are being built right now. Houston has one that's supposed to open sometime at the end of next year. My little joke is that, well, you know how Houston always follows San Antonio and so forth. Los Angeles is building a $90 million cougar crossing. And there are several others now around the country. So it's kind of when you do things that make sense, then other people do it.
Great.
Thank you. That makes sense. Dr. Wilcox, do you have anything to add to that?
Just to build briefly on the excellent points that both Representative Doggett and Mayor Hardberger raised. When we have the opportunity to build new crossings and corridors, this is really a unique opportunity to help to seed and invest in native species. And so there are many benefits to this, including lower maintenance costs in the long run. And also it helps to promote use by native wildlife. So species like ocelot are what we call habitat specialists. They stick to something known as Tamaulipan thorn scrub. And so in order to get ocelots to use underpasses and wildlife corridors, we need to ensure that Tamaulipan thorn scrub is present. So yes, this is a very unique opportunity, and we will be working really hard to ensure that native plant species, soil restoration are all a part of corridor and crossing development in Texas.
Thank you.
Seth, thank you so much. I'm going to have to make a 4 o'clock, but Councilman Baird, it's really good to be with you and hear your remarks and to hear your concern for these climate issues, because I know you're in the heart of the oil and gas economy, which remains important to our state. But thinking long-term, as you're doing, is very much what we need. Thanks to Dr. Wilcox, to each of you. And our struggle will continue. Let's hope that by the end of the month, we have some success on this and then can go after those grants. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Congressman.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, let's see. We might have time for 1 or 2 more questions if there's anybody who wants to ask something. And if not, this has been a really great event, and thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been fantastic to hear from all of you and the congressman as well. And yes, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing, Seth. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Well,
Thank
you all
you.
have a great day.
Thank both of you, Seth and Luke. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And it's great, again, to have all of you here. Thank you.